we're now talking about how to retain guard against around the legs passes. And we're just going to go through how this section is structured so you understand that, and it'll be easy for you to navigate. We're first going through just the general movements and concepts related to this style of guard retention and what our aims are and what our opponent's aims might be. Then we're going to go into a few different phases, or some of the key things that are going to direct where we go. So our first phase is going to be trying to pummel our feet and just having good leg pummeling and keeping our opponent in front of us and how we approach that. Then we're going to go through when our opponent passes in front of us, so we're facing our opponent, they're trying to run past our legs. How do we recover from there? We're going to go from when our opponent turns us away, so when our hips are now facing the wrong direction, how do we work to recover and face back to our opponent if that happens? And we'll also work from the north-south position. So if they've actually run all the way 180 degrees from our legs, how do we pummel and get back to our guard retention from there? So there's those 4 stages. Pummeling our feet, they're passing in front of our legs when we're facing in, they've turned us away, or there's the north-south position. And then after that, we're going to go through the individual guard passes, like specific retention for each kind of pass type. So that's when you're a bit late, or any specific details that pertain to a particular type of guard pass, for example, the leg drag and so on.
From the guard player's perspective, really broad aim for defending around the legs passing. We're just looking at maintaining our feet in front of our opponent, looking for our feet to hit either the shoulders or the biceps. Once we're here, we are then looking to establish some kind of upper body or lower body control. In this case, I have a collar, and then to tie up our opponent in a guard.
So the guard passes aim, we're going to break it down first just into 2 different ways they might approach the Toreando. And to be honest, the around the legs pass. And to be honest, sometimes it's a combination of these 2, but often the person's either trying to turn the hips away and then try to pass, or not turn the hips away, but to run around the legs and pass into that gap from there. And within that, there's a few different guard pass types. So to turn the hips away, there's, for example, a leg drag where they pull the leg across. There's a throw by where they throw the leg and look to pass, around from that. There's just a standard kind of bullfighter where they just turn the legs and start trying to pass through that too. For the running in front of the legs style passes, there's a few different options there too. There's types of Toreando where they're trying to block, open up this gap and pass through that. Sometimes the person will look to step around and pass from like a north-south position. Quite common to see people control the bottom leg with like a cross grip here, which stops that leg from following, and try to walk and pass into that gap. Sometimes instead of trying to run around in front, the person will try to spin you to pass. And sometimes people will try to come into Neon Valley through that gap as well. With the eventual aim for this retention being to recover our legs back in front of our opponent's shoulders or biceps, let's have a look at 3 main ways you can do this. First, so let's say Ari starts to make an angle. The first is just to pummel your feet. There's different ways we can achieve this, but just finding a direct pathway straight back to the torso of your opponent. Then there's some more tricky ones which involve the invert actions. For example, if Ari's blocked my bottom leg, I cannot bring that in a direct pathway to get back to the bicep, but I can spin it all the way around, which is what the invert does, and it will come back into the bicep. So if you watch this leg, I can't bring it in, but I can spin it through all the way around with that invert, and that gets me back to the bicep. And then similar, the Gongoa action, I now, because my hips are turned, I can't bring this foot back to face Ari, but I can spin it all the way this way. And come back in front of the biceps.
General positioning for defending around the legs passes. So we've covered this previously in the interception section in a lot more depth. So the first thing we want to have is our hips away from our opponent. So it's easier for us to pummel our legs and also to invert if need be. The next thing we want to have is our feet facing the biceps, but also constantly moving. We also want to make sure that our feet are in different positions. So we don't want our feet basically in the same position, because it's a lot easier for our opponent to control and redirect. So one high and one low. Always have knees close to the chest or shoulders, just so that we have our torso defended, so that they cannot pass into that gap. Hand positioning. So our hands are either going to be framing our own legs or our opponent, or we're going to be using our elbows on the mat to square back up with our opponent or change the position of our hips.
Just a refresher on this, because it's going to be very important for around the legs passing. You've got to frame the thing, like first of all, like if your feet are in the way, you don't need to use your arms to frame. So we're often going to have our arms or with our elbows on the ground ready to move. And often, even with our frame, we might have one hand framing and the other one with the elbow on the ground, which can be some sort of frame too. Our elbows can be used to move our hips away or to move our hips towards our elbow, depending on whether we want to open then close our elbow or close then open our elbow. So if Ari was to be leading with his shoulder, we could block the shoulder. If he postures up a bit more, I might block closer to the elbow. Again, if I keep this high, I risk getting arm locked. So by blocking it lower, I've got less chance of bringing my elbow above the line of his hip for the arm lock. If he steps in with his legs, I'll often frame against the legs too. And then there's just, as I said, often one arm will be framing and the other arm is going to be on the ground. The elbow to the mat will help stop Ari from turning me away. I can use that to resist that, and also to help move my hips, recenter, face, and recover my guard.
All right, this one you get to see me again. So Ari has cleared the legs. So immediately, preemptively, again, guys, one of the most common mistakes I see is people they frame too late. It needs to be preemptive late. It's as soon as your legs are cleared, that hand needs to be outstretched, okay? And obviously your other elbow, you're framing on the ground and supporting your leg if you feel like you're being turned. You can see I framed off the leg because he's quite tall and he stepped his legs too close. That's let me start to square my hips up. Again, framing the legs, changing it to the shoulders as he goes to north-south, keeping him from closing the distance and allowing myself to square back up and recover. A further look at leg positioning is just to show you really, especially here we're doing situational training. Ari's trying to pass and I'm trying to prevent him going around the legs in particular, which means we can have a look at particularly what I'm trying to do to go prevent the around the legs, but just closing this gap off. And anytime Ari tries to pin a leg, inverting underneath. I think that's really important. Not reaching this leg out to your opponent, but making sure you keep this angle up in front, bringing your knee towards your shoulder and your foot towards your head, best you can to invert through. Yeah, so you see, each time he goes for one leg, I try to spin towards that side. And this is something I was not doing prior to this, trying to learn this style of guard retention, and I think it's made a massive difference.
A really important thing for around the legs passing is, I think you don't want to be like just square on to your opponent like this, especially when they get control of your legs. It's fine if I've got control, or while I'm gaining control, but once Ari has control of my legs, I don't want to be square on. I really want to be I want to choose a side and close down that side. Now, there's a mistake I used to make where I'd be here, they'd get control of the legs, and then Ari could just kind of quickly step in, and it's too easy to take this space here, okay, just this space between my knee and my chest. As soon as, it made a huge difference, as soon as Ari was getting control, or anyone gets control, if I hip out to a side, get my hips away, face, and close this gap here, and now if Ari wants to take that gap, I've got my bottom leg to block, and even if he clears that, my knee's in, I can be framing and everything's going to work. Okay, so you might find this is a mistake that you're running into, where you're square, they're getting control, and then they start to make an angle, and then you're trying to fight, and you're already on the back foot. Okay, so as soon as Ari gets control, I'm choosing a side, and then I'm fighting from there, and it's a much easier battle to win.
Here's an example where you can see choosing a side, and so you'll see it's quite a quick clip, but you see I choose a side to go to, or as Ari starts to step around as well. And what it does is I've put my leg high, so it's covered this space. You can see there's no way that Ari will close the gap and actually attach to my torso without being over the top of this leg, which would put him back in guard. So what Ari does is actually walks back the other way. He tries to walk back square. He actually wants to be more in front of me to set up his pass when that's the position. You see he's walked back in this direction. So once more, we're here. Ari he clears that he gets control of my legs. So it's a good time for me to start to change and turn my angle. So here we are, and he tries to pin that leg, so I make sure I scoot underneath and get that leg not pinned out here, which would open the gap, but curling up. And then, so as he realizes that gap is closed, he walks back square to reset. Here you can see another example of when this angle is closed off by the top leg. You don't have to be as flexible as Ari here with your foot all the way back, but even if this foot was bent less far back, this avenue here is totally closed off, and that forces the passer to actually forces me to on top to walk back in front of the hips or to the other side to try to pass.
Basic overview of our strategy against defending around the legs passes. So at all times, we're always looking to swim our feet back to the shoulders and biceps. So even if my opponent is passing around my legs and I'm facing towards them, I can still swim my feet back to the biceps. Even if my hips are getting redirected away, if I'm able to stop my hips from being fully turned away, I can still high pommel back towards the biceps. After this, if my bottom leg is cleared and I'm facing my opponent and I'm still able to turn in, I can push off my bottom leg to invert all the way through. If my hips are being redirected though, I can invert away with the gongoa roll.
So strategy is always pummel.
Always pummel.
I'm getting around, and you can't pummel, that's when you spin.
Yeah.
And I'm turning you and you can't pummel, and that's when you go.
Yeah.
In this section, we're going through how to pummel our legs. And what we mean by that is just getting your feet back in front of the biceps of your opponent, the simple way without having to invert or turn away. And there's a few different phases we're going to have of this particular way of retaining our guard for around the legs passes. The first is just how we position our feet relative to the way our opponent is trying to clear our feet from the biceps. It is something we covered in the general section at the start of this series, but we're just going to have a quick refresher on that, and then we're going to get into how something called the crossover, which is when your opponent does start to clear your legs. It's probably the most direct way to recover your feet and get back to guard, and there's 4 different types of crossover we will cover. After that, we'll show the under pummel as well, and that will complete the pummeling section. And after that, we then can move on to how to invert and use the gongoa.
Looking at foot placement in relation to what the guard passer is trying to do. So right now, with my feet on the biceps, if Lockie were to attack a bullfighter pass, this foot placement here would stop this attempt. If Lockie were to attack a throw bite or a leg drag, if I bring my foot to the outside of the forearm, now his own forearm obstructs my leg from getting thrown across. If Lockie is to go under my legs, if I pummel my foot to the back of the shoulder blade, this will stop him from attacking an under the legs pass. Sometimes people will try to clear your feet from the biceps by punching the pants down like so. What we can look to do is first curl our toes over the biceps and also flex our feet towards us so that we stop our feet from getting cleared from the biceps. You can also obviously move your hips closer towards your opponent as well.
We're now talking about the crossover and the 4 variants of that. Okay, I'm going to show the first 3, and then Ari's going to show the last one, which is the high pummel. But just so you understand what we're talking about, we've got it's when we're gonna do a crossover when our opponent starts to get past or clear our legs, and we want to get our legs back in front. And what we mean by crossover is, you'll see I want to take my leg across my body or across past the other leg, almost crossing our feet to recover guard. And we're going to say this is the near arms. This would be a near side crossover. I can go for a far side crossover where I reach towards the far shoulder. And there's also a long crossover where I would start to go towards the hip here, like this, to recover. And then there's the high pummel, which Ari will cover, which is where we bring our leg nice and high to come back in front. Now, so when, important, obviously we know these movements, but when do we do them is like the context when we use them is really important. If your hips are facing your opponent, it's fine to go the near shoulder. So let's say Ari's starting to pass around and I'm facing Ari. I feel pretty comfortable to collect to the near shoulder here, because if Ari tries to clear this leg, it's not easy to do, and I'm probably going to be able to pummel my other leg and circle pretty well. If my hips are square or I've been turned, I do not want to look for the near shoulder. If I go for the near shoulder here, Ari can quite easily deflect that and I lose it. Or if you kind of twist your shoulders, if he's here and I look for this near shoulder, he's again going to deflect that pretty easy. So we only really go for that near shoulder if our hips are facing our opponent. And there's two ways we can go for it. We can go over or under the arm. So let's say Ari's arm is here. Sometimes you can pummel over the top to get your foot in position. Or sometimes if his elbow's open, I can pummel under. So his elbow's closed, we tend to go over. If his elbow is open, we can go under to get our position. So that's our near side pummel. If Ari has turned, we're going to want to go for the far side pummel. So it's a short, far side pummel. Short being just to the arms. Okay. So if you look at that, as Ari's turned his shoulder, I'm not going for the near shoulder. I want to swing my leg over to the far shoulder. And then it's usually a push-pull. If I push with that leg, pull with my other leg, I can retract my foot and get it back on the bicep. So you can see my right leg can't pummel. See my right leg can't get back. If I push on the bicep, pull with my right leg, I can replace it and square myself back up. Then there's the long pummel, which is really when this shoulder is not even available. Maybe Ari has really dropped his weight down and my feet are low and I'm framing like this. You can see with my left foot, I'm not going to be able to reach this arm. And in that case, it might be a good idea to go to the far hip. We don't want to look to the hip immediately, but in this scenario, this is a good option. It does open up a pass around the back. Look at all this space Ari has. So if I kind of stay here, Ari might be able to work under and around the legs and start to get this very bad for me. So whenever we go far hip, I am not looking, whenever I go here, I'm usually not looking to recover my feet and go back like this. There's too many gaps to get caught. I want to spin through, okay? So if I catch this far hip, I'm going to push off that invert to recover my feet. All right. Now we just go back one step. Whenever you can, get to that far, like if your hips are being turned and this arm's available, get to this far arm, because now Ari cannot just run around. This is a physical block. If he tries to go around my body, you see I can make space and do another crossover and recover. If you go to the hip, his arm is free to trap your leg, grab this leg, and I now can't use that leg back. I've lost my ability to make space. So I know it's often taught in guard retention that when someone moves your leg, that you put your foot on their hip, but this is giving them a chance to counter you. Okay, we really want to go towards the arm. They clear, we go across, and we can come back. Just a note on frames when we're doing these crossover movements. Usually, as soon as the feet are cleared, we're going to want to be extending our frame, protracting our shoulder, and catching whatever's near, whether it's the elbow or the shoulder or the leg, to buy us as much time as possible to get our crossover to hit. Okay, without framing, the chance that your leg's going to come in before the arms is quite low, and you can close the gap too quick. So we're using our frame, elbow to the ground to prevent our hips turning, so it's usually one arm framing the other one. We can allow our feet to come in.
We're just looking at some crossovers. I got the speed a bit slower just from some live rolling, just so you can see when and where to cross over. Obviously, kind of wherever you can connect to your leg is obviously the main thing here, but you'll see a moment has been clearing my foot to the side. I'm stepping on the near shoulder. That shoulder is available, and that's the most easy crossover to establish, and that's going to allow me to retract my right leg here. Oh no, it doesn't. I need to get my foot a little deeper onto the shoulder. That lets me retract my leg, and now I have this leg free again. Okay, so Ben was controlling that. My crossover has freed that leg, and I'm back to a good position. Here we'll see Ari using a crossover against like a big throw by. So obviously when your opponent tries to turn your leg by throwing your leg, you can, the first thing is try to face them still and use a crossover. And you see he misses and then scoots underneath and connects his foot to the shoulder. That let him recover. Here I am rolling with Ari, and you can see I am framing his far shoulder, trying to get my top leg connected. And you'll see Ari does this big throw again. So here, if he was to turn me, I would have to go to a gongo, which is a later stage movement. But if I can, I'm going to swing this leg across to connect it as a crossover. And there we are. Okay. And this was a time where, you know, I slid up from the hip up towards the shoulder or near the arm, because the hip was kind of available. He'd turned a lot, but as he drops down in and around the shoulder was better, and that was enough to make me recover. Here you get to see an example of the long crossover. So in this scenario, I'm trying to do a high pummel, which we learn in a moment. But you can see I've missed anywhere to put this leg on, and then Ari's going to jam my leg down. So I haven't got a good purchase really anywhere with this foot. I want it to be stepping a lot better than that. And as he throws my trapped leg a little bit further, or it gets a bit deeper with that, it's going to expose. The only real place I can go for is going to be his hip. So his near bicep is not really available to my left leg. And that's where I'm going to swim over the top here, step on the hip. Now, as I said, you can spin through here, or in this case, it's enough for me to recover by kind of pushing away with my bottom leg. So I kind of managed to off balance him here. But if that off balance didn't work, I would have to spin under to recover from that. Lastly, here's Ari again, and you'll see him as I try to go for a leg drag. He's going to bring his leg towards my far bicep. So generally, the more you've turned, the more you have to turn back. It would be a bad idea to go for this shoulder. He would continue to be turned. He needs to get all the way and go for this far arm in this case. And that blocks me. Also notice something about this. This clip does cut out straight after this, but I'm trying to cut underneath Ari's leg. This is a counter to the crossover. I actually want to reach under and grip this leg. Because he stepped on my bicep and not past it, I'm unable to scoot underneath.
The next phase of our crossover is the high pummel. So the high pummel happens when the guard player fails to pummel his foot underneath the forearm. So if Lockie doesn't do the high pummel in this instance here, and I've got really good inside control on this top shin, what's going to happen is I'm going to start to redirect his legs all the way to the other side, and then I'm going to look to finish my bullfighter cross. So using the high pummel, he can actually stop my pass entirely. So basically what's going to happen is when I start to redirect his legs, and Lockie's noticed that he can't swim his foot underneath my forearm, he's going to look to go over my forearm. Now, if he just tries to go over my forearm here, I can still punch his legs away. The moment he's able to get his foot past the line of his belt, he should be able to pummel his leg back inside. The reason why, whenever his foot is behind this line, it's going to be really easy for me to keep his leg pinned towards the mat because I can still get inside this space of his shin. Oops. The moment his leg starts to track above, I actually can't pull his leg all the way back. So again. So looking at how to do the high pommel movement, what I'm looking to do is, the most important part is being able to bring this leg all the way above my head. Now, I want to make sure I do like a really big arc with this leg. If I'm quite lazy with this circular motion, Lockie will be able to punch this leg towards the floor. So before he gets this leg to the floor, first thing I want to do is I want to make sure I'm framing, so I stop him from getting chest to chest connection. Second thing, as I start to pummel my leg up, I also want to hit my far elbow onto the floor to reinforce this side of my body, to stop my body from being turned towards this direction. So my elbow hits the floor, I'm pummeling up, and I'm trying to turn my hips all the way towards the guard pass. So once my foot hits the shoulder, I can push away and then recover my bottom leg and square back up. So one more time. Lockie's attacking the bullfighter. Common mistakes with the high pummel. Sometimes people will go for the high pummel when it's not necessary. By that, we're talking about going for the high pummel when they can easily pummel their foot back underneath the forearm to the shoulder. Second most common mistake, a lot of people, when they're trying to square up with their opponent, they let this leg drop to the floor, which gives the guard pass an inside leg position. So while I may still be able to pummel my leg to the shoulder, I'm now given Lockie the option of either going for a knee cut or an under the legs pass. Or even like that under the legs pass to the other side. Other common mistake a lot of people will do is they won't reinforce their hips with their elbows. They won't put this elbow to the mat. When this happens, it's a lot easier for the guard pass to redirect the legs. What we should be looking to do is to obviously frame, so abduct our shoulder so that our elbow is on the outside of our body. And we can also sometimes look to frame on the outside of the knee initially while we're kind of resisting the redirection of the hips before we pummel back. Another common mistake we'll see with the high pummel is the guard player not hipping out to reset the angle. So currently, when my hips, as my hips are getting redirected, this is obviously really bad. I'm facing away from the guard passer and he's on the other side of my body. So when I hip out, I reset the angle so that I can face my hips towards the guard passer. And now it's a lot easier for me to kick my leg up and back to the shoulder. So if you try to high pummel without hipping up, it should look like this. Basically, I won't be able to bring my leg back inside because Lockie will always be able to stay on the inside of my leg. However, if I do hip out, I should be able to get my leg back inside. Another important part that a lot of people miss with the high pummel is it's kind of at the end stage of the pummel. Once they've lifted the leg up, they're not turning the leg out. So what's happening here is Lockie is still staying on the inside of my leg, like so, and I'm actually not able to bring my leg back inside. However, if I turn my knee out, now when I bend my knee, my foot should still land on his shoulder. So we're basically attacking from, or we should say defending from two planes. So we're looking at this plane here, and then when I'm ready to bring my leg back inside, I turn my leg out to bring my foot back to the shoulder. So if I just lift my leg out without turning my knee out, when I go to chop my leg back inside, I'm actually going to miss the shoulder. I might hit the elbow, but he'll be able to deflect my foot. However, when I turn my knee out, now my foot should hit the shoulder when I bend my knee. In summary, for the high pommel, we're looking to frame the shoulder, frame on the outside of our body, and support the knee. Turn our hips out, kicking our leg out and up, turning our knee out, connecting our foot to the shoulder, and recovering our bottom foot.
So the last sequence of our pummeling is the under pummel. And this is a great follow-up to when the high pummel is even blocked. So let's say Ari is getting around now, and I go to high pummel here, and I realize like he's really heavy, like pressuring this leg, even when my leg comes high. Okay. To do that, look how much he's had to lean over me to block the high pummel. Like I kind of walk away from here. If he's walked away and he's out here, there's no way he's going to be stopping my leg from coming up. So when he comes forward like that, he usually gives me plenty of room to take my under pummel, which is by bringing my inside leg here up. And then I just extend anywhere I can connect to him here. I obviously don't want him to pass under my legs because I'm giving him a chance to do that. So you've still got your frame. So we go again. We're here, I take my leg out and I pull my hips out to the side, making it hard to go under the legs. Okay, so if we look at that, again, Ari's starting to get around. I bring my leg up and my hips come out as far as possible, pushing off that leg and hipping out until my left leg can pummel back in front and I'm back to the biceps. There's some common mistakes with the under pummel. First one is we're gonna make sure I'm using my elbow to the mat to stop being turned. So if Ari's here and I'm not putting my elbow to the mat, I'm gonna get squashed as I try to under pummel. So I need something, particularly usually this elbow, to be supporting the leg or on the ground. Framing as well. Okay, if you don't frame, then as I go like this, Ari's going to close this gap way too much. So the preemptive frame here, as soon as I am losing position, just like when I was going for my high pummel, I'm keeping maximum distance with that arm. The next, and probably the most common mistake with this one, is keeping the hips. See where my hips are? They're on the wrong side of Ari here. If I just swing my leg back and go here, this is an excellent under the legs pass for Ari. So you really need to move your hips out. And I almost want to make it so this leg gets retracted as we do that too. So as Ari goes, I want to hip out and hip out to the side. So as soon as I connect my leg, hipping out as much as possible to drop this knee down. Okay, not leaving this leg here underneath where Ari can catch the knee line. If I've moved so that this knee line's dropped, it's very difficult for him to get a secondary attack going. So once more with that, as Ari goes around, go under, hip out. And that'll let our foot come in the bicep and we can retain our gap.
We have a few examples of the under pummel here. So you can see Ari starts to pass around the legs. I tried a high pummel here. So I'm trying to do my leg's blocked, so I want a high pummel if I can. But he's blocked my outside leg. So this leg is not going to be able to make it in front. I need something to prevent Ari from closing this gap here. So that's where I change my leg positioning again and I bring my right leg, inside leg back in front. Okay, so see here, I've kicked my inside leg up, past in front of Ari's arm, and even just pushing against his hand with my leg by pushing outwards, that is going to spin me to square back up. Okay, and then I get in a little bit of trouble here. I then have to block another pass because I kind of overcommitted, but expect an under the legs pass as you go for an under pummel. Here's another example. I couldn't high pummel there, and then I've gone back with the under pummel. Probably a little bit more preemptive here. I tried a high pummel. He's holding that leg too well. I'm framing the shoulder. As soon as I realize that leg's not going, my right leg comes in front of this side of the body, and that lets my hips turn back, swing back in front of Ari. Another example, this is a more newer clip, and I think my guard retention's improved again. So you see these reactions get a bit faster. And here, Ari starts to come around. I realize I'm not going to be able to recover with this leg, and I haven't got my feet in alternate planes, which is a problem, but I'm going to kick this leg up against his hand, and that's that same action. By getting that inside leg coming up against the hand, it's going to spin my hips back out to the other side. Here's an example of Ari using the under pummel. Slightly different setup there, but I'm starting to pass around, or try to pass around, and I start to block. You see I've managed to block this top high pummeling leg. Okay, so I'm starting to clear that, and he's already coming through with his other leg to come in front. Okay, and he uses that to push off. Now, he's using my hand as you see my hand's trying to control that, but when he brings his foot up, it becomes that when he just pushes out on that hand, it spins his hips.
All right, so to summarize the leg positioning and keeping our feet in front of our opponent, there's defending the different, preventing them from disengaging from our legs. So if Ari's trying to run around, I've got my feet on the inside. If he's trying to throw the leg, I have my foot on the outside. If he's trying to go underneath the legs, then I can put my foot underneath the armpit, like so. And if he's trying to push my feet down, I can curl my toes and pull back towards me, pulling against the forearm here, making it difficult to disengage. Then if he does clear my legs, our crossover is usually the first thing we're looking for. So if the near shoulder is available and he hasn't turned my hips, I can pummel and recover just on the near shoulder. If he's turned my hips a little bit, I'm usually going to want to look for the far shoulder, so the far bicep. This is the best place if he can't reconnect from that. But sometimes he will really drop his weight down and we can't get to any of the legs, but we can get to the far hip. If you do have to go here, you roll through and you retain your guard like that. And then sometimes Ari will pass around this side and may connect anywhere to bring this leg is blocked from an immediate entry, but we can use this high pummel action, bring it nice and high to pummel through. And lastly, Ari might still even block that. We get there, I try to high pummel, I can't, I bring the under pummel, hip out, and I can keep my legs in front. When we're facing towards our opponent, but they've cleared our ability to just pummel our legs. So we've got to the point where the person started to come around the legs and you don't see a clear way to just get the feet back in front with any of the crossovers or actions we've talked about. And there's going to be two main spins to recover. So most of the time here, especially when our bottom leg can't come back in, we end up swinging it around. We use these invert type motions to come back to get our legs in front. But there'll also be a section just when that gets a little worse and they've actually started to close the gap in around here or into something like a Neon Valley we'll cover, when they've got in front of our legs and start to close the gap too. When our opponents cleared our legs and they're starting to get around, so I see my ability to immediately pummel might be gone. What's my initial strategy and posture I want to take? Now, we're saying facing in, we're calling this when you're facing your opponent, but you don't want to actually turn all the way on your side. So when Ari starts to get around here, I don't want to turn like this. Look, he's now pinned my leg down, and I'm gonna have a real hard time getting that leg back. Okay, so we're saying facing in, but it's actually a little bit more facing the roof. And that makes it a little harder to pin that leg. A lot of it's actually about not letting this leg get pinned and not letting it get cleared. So you don't want this leg just dangling out here. Anytime I dangle the leg out, it's easy to pin, and then you can get past that, and my knee starts to open from my chest. Okay, that's not what I want. Okay, we have an option when they do pin it, which is to invert. We'll cover that, but that's not the ideal scenario. What I want is to support my leg with my hand so it can't get pinned, and have it more coming up in a bit more of a vertical plane, like this. So I've closed off, if you see here with my foot coming up and my knee being close to my chest, there's no avenue for Ari. If he tries to pass in like that, stay on the side, just try and come forward. He's just coming back into my guard if he tries to go here. It really forces him to keep running around and not work on this plane. Whereas if my leg gets pinned or cleared, he can actually come in on this angle. Okay, so a big mistake I used to make was to chase my opponent with this leg. They started to get around. I used to try to like reach for their arm, reach for their leg with my leg, and I actually allow him now to pin and clear it. Okay, don't do that. Focus more on the positioning of your leg and your body as he starts to go around. I'm bringing my legs up. Okay, and this can now, I could potentially pummel in this plane, and that's fine. Okay, but if he's back and away from that, that's fine. We've got some options here. We're going to cover the turtle shell spin, which lets us spin back, and also what we do if that doesn't work and we get pinned, and that's where we use the invert. So just on that, anytime you do feel like your leg is getting pinned, you should be curling it towards it, catching your shin and trying to turn it into the plane where you can chop back here. Okay, so not having you don't want it so your knee's getting like pushed down, like kind of pinned like this is really bad. Anytime I feel my leg getting pinned, capture, bring your hips up and out so that you can actually get in this plane.
Another reason we put our leg high is it actually makes it very hard for our opponent to turn us away. If we have our near leg coming up nice and high, what happens is my leg ends up past the center of rotation, which would be here. So when Michael tries to turn my hips towards the camera, if I push against that with my leg, it's actually going to spin my hips towards him due to me rotating around this axis. So if he pushes away like this and I push against it, you see that spins me back with my legs back in front of him. Whereas with my legs low, as you'll see here, where he's pushing, if the center of rotation he's now pushing below that and pushing towards the camera again. If I push against that now, for example, against him here, you'll see that spins my head towards him and my legs away, which actually potentially exposes an ability to be passed. Okay, obviously we have a counters if our leg does get put here, but by preference, we're wanting to put our leg high, and therefore when they try to turn us away, we can push back to square ourselves back up, as opposed to low, whereas if we push back against our opponent, it turns us more towards north-south. Here you'll see a great example where I'm going to, with my right hand here, try to pin Ari's leg as I walk around, and you see he won't allow me to. So I'm trying to push that down to the ground. He's already curling through, and that space to come in is gone. And you see it gets to the point where he's inverted up. So, or like he's facing me, and there's no way I can pin that leg to the ground and actually get in position to do that. Another example of me doing the same thing. So you see Ari starting to move out to the side. He's going to want to pin this leg down. You can see, because I'm holding my knee, which is okay at not letting my knee get pulled out, but you can see my foot could be vulnerable to being pinned. So as Ari starts to push that down, I will actually change my grip to my calf to prevent, you can see if I actually grip the shin, that stops my foot getting pinned and not my knee getting twisted in like that. Okay, and then as I do that, there's no space to pass inwards here, and that lets me spin all the way through and recover.
So this inversion that we're using is where we're pushing off the bottom foot onto the floor to invert all the way through. So the scenario where we need to use this is basically where our top foot can't pummel, our hips are turned inwards facing the guard passer, and our bottom leg is cleared. Okay, so this is quite a bad scenario essentially. So I'm not able to pummel my top foot over or underneath. The most I could get is maybe a low, like a knee shield underneath the armpit. But I still can't recover my guard from here without inverting because he's cleared my top knee. So all I'm going to start to do is I'm going to start to plant my bottom foot onto the floor, keeping my top knee tight to my chest and my knee flared out. What I'm going to start to do is I'm going to start to take my upper body towards my foot as I start to come up onto my shoulder. From here, I'm spinning all the way through, aiming to take my head towards my bottom foot. And squaring up. One more time. So my hips are facing the guard passer. I can't pummel my top foot back inside, and he's completely cleared my bottom foot. So maybe he's like almost near belly here. Common mistakes you'll see with the bottom leg invert. First one is people not tucking their head. So they're kind of trying to invert while they're extended through their spine. You always need to tuck your head so that you can take your head towards your bottom foot. Second mistake is not maintaining the top knee connected to your chest, to your top shoulder, sorry. So if I simply try to disconnect my top knee from my chest, basically doing like a pendulum motion, as I spin through, I'm basically going to end up in the north-south pass. So the whole purpose of this top knee staying glued to your chest is so that you keep your torso covered. Okay, you keep your torso defended so that your opponent can't pummel in for a north-south pass and complete the guard pass. So I stay tight with my top knee, and then I start to push off my bottom leg, and I crunch my head towards my foot, making sure my upper spine isn't extended. Another common mistake that you'll see a lot of people do with this bottom leg invert is as they're spinning through, they lose connection with this top shin and the guard passer's ribs. So their leg comes off, and now when they try and spin all the way back through, they're not actually squaring up with their opponent. So it's really important that if you do happen to make this like knee shield or hook on the guy's ribs, that when you spin through, you use this hook kind of like as a reference point to where you should end up facing after your roll. Obviously, if your opponent is C-gripping your shin, like so, you're not going to be able to connect your shin to his ribs, but simply just making sure that you're kind of pushing back into your opponent's rib should help you square back up. Another common mistake you'll see people do is essentially allowing the crossface. Okay, so this can also relate back to people not tucking their head and staying extended. So if I start to extend and I'm slow in the invert, even though I'm being bullfighted, I'm now going to be getting crossfaced from this spot. So when I start to initiate this invert, I have to start to tuck my head to prevent the crossface, and also so that I can start to invert. I can't be crossfaced here when I'm mid-invert. Another common mistake is confusing the frames. So as we've mentioned earlier, we want to be framing on the outside of the knee and the near arm framing the near shoulder. But with this particular scenario here, our bottom leg is actually completely cleared. And we're actually starting to turn into our opponent almost like we're almost basically turning belly down for this kind of inversion. So if I frame like this, I actually make it a lot harder for myself to invert. It's also a lot harder to invert with the bottom arm outstretched. When we invert to a particular side, we will tuck the bottom arm inwards so that we can actually invert through. You can see here, if I'm framing and I try to invert, I actually make it a lot worse for myself. If I frame with this arm here, this cross post, now I can spin all the way through because I'm able to tuck my bottom arm underneath my body. Quick summary of the bottom leg inversion. So the situation arises when I can't pummel my top leg back underneath or over. My bottom leg is completely cleared, and I'm also facing the guard passer, so I'm turned inwards. All I'm doing from here is I'm taking my head towards my bottom foot, and as I start to crunch in, I push up my bottom leg to spin all the way through. I'm making sure that my head crunches in, I'm not extending, making sure that I'm framing with my I'm making a crosshand frame, and making sure that I'm not getting cross-faced on the way, and that I stay attached to my opponent throughout the duration of the inversion.
So we'll have a look at two examples of the invert. And actually, I want to show some footage of Ari doing it, but I don't have any footage of him doing the invert because it's so hard to actually pin his leg down and force this position. And actually, I think I've gotten better at this myself than when this was initially filmed. So you can see my foot's kind of dangling out there for Ari to attach to, which I tend to keep further back now. And as soon as he would try to pin it, I should be trying to bring it above the line of my, or catching it, not letting it get pinned and brought up. But when they do pin it, you can't bring it back in front. So an invert can be a good option. So from here, it might be too late to try to scoop up and pull the leg high. So the invert is a good option. This invert almost gets me in trouble as well. So I put my foot on the ground. You can see this left foot is disconnected and he's blocked it from connecting to the far shoulder. So when I invert, I have some connection with it, but I do end up ending up in a reasonably bad plane because Ari kind of throws that out of the way. And so now I have to defend another around the legs pass and try to frame quickly to recover. So if you can connect your top leg, it is a much stronger action to use. And again, so in that same roll, getting my leg pinned, and I'll start to invert through. So here, foot goes to the mat, head goes through, and that allows my feet to come in front, and I'm able to recover. This is more an example of what to do as your leg is about to get pinned. So this is a tough situation where my foot's being turned outwards. It's very hard to I'm being, my knees getting turned in and my foot out. So there's a bit of internal rotation pressure. And you sometimes have to straighten your leg out to escape something like this, and that leaves it vulnerable to get pinned. So that's where I invert underneath that leg, kind of before it gets pinned. So I don't want to let it actually go to the ground. Sorry. That was the other leg. Sorry. My fault. This leg gets pinned down here, and I don't want to let it get the ground. I want to invert underneath it before it even touches the ground, so I've changed the plane, and I can then chop it back in front of the forearm.
Stay facing.
No. Okay, so we're going to work the turtle shell spin, and I just want to give you some context for this particular style of guard retention. It's when Ari is trying to pretty much walk around to north-south to pass the guard. So he wants to walk all the way to here to pass. Now, why would he do that? Well, I'm going to close off this space here on this side. So as Ari starts to get around, I'm facing him, and I'm going to be extending my bottom leg. So I've got one leg high, one leg low. Okay. He can't just come into this gap. Well, he can, but if he wants to come into here, it's going to let my legs come back in front. So he's actually going to have to keep walking past the line of my bottom leg. Okay. And now that's his gap to work into. So the turtle shell spin, we're going to spin all the way through. I'll give you a quick demonstration of how this works. So Ari's walking around, and I start to spin back, and I don't give him a space to work through. So, as I said before, the bottom leg is going to track. As Ari starts to move around, I try to keep my foot just past the line of his hip. And this top leg here, I'm going to keep my knee on the outside, and the foot's going to go to the inside. So as Ari begins to walk around, what I'm doing is I'm closing off, in case he tries to take control of that space, my shin will be in the way. So keep going around, come in towards the legs now. You see my leg can be in the way, and I can be using that to spin back. So you're going to have that small part of your back on the ground and your hips lifted, trying to connect this shin to your training partner. Ari moves around. I start to bring this leg up and extend. Okay? If his feet are available, I can push off that. If he's pressuring with his upper body, usually just by extending my leg here, that will spin me back. One other use for the turtle shell spin is if your opponent, instead of running to north-south, they might spin you. Okay, so Ari spins me, I use this same motion to recover. Now, common mistakes from here. One of the first ones is not tracking with the bottom leg. So if Ari walks around and I keep my legs here, they're both in the same plane, and he can just pass like here. He doesn't have to walk towards north-south. So we really need to be forcing them to kind of overcommit in this direction and be ready for it. Okay, so walk around now. And this is going to give me a much better ability to go. Next common mistake, not lifting your hips. I need my hips up. With my hips flat, like this, Ari can block this leg coming in at all. With my hips lifting, I can use that to spin through. Another common mistake is swinging the legs wide. So I want this leg dab action. Okay, I want the knee on one side, foot on the other, and my foot coming out like this. All right. So as Ari goes around like this, if I was to open my legs wide, I just give him a lot of space to push my legs through and control the north-south position. I need to be taking control of this inside positioning of my chest. So Ari goes around, then to make sure my shin folds up across that, and then I can work to recover through. Last mistake is doing this at the wrong time. So I don't do this if Ari just kind of makes a bit of an angle. If he gets to here and he's trying to pass in there, I don't try to like spin through. It's going to be quite a difficult movement, and I'm going to give him an opening. I really want to force him to be walking around himself or to be spinning me. It'd be easy to do the turtle shell spin.
Here we'll see a few examples of the turtle shell spin. So Dan is on top and he's around the side. So he's trying to pass around the legs, and I've extended this bottom leg, holding on to it so it doesn't get pinned down and blocked from re-entering. And then I'm going to spin myself right through by extending this leg as I spin. So I spin through, or I grip his leg even because it's available. And then I use that to spin through. And that can actually be a great leg entry, as we'll see later in the offense section too. Same thing with Ari. As he begins to get around, my bottom leg here is closing this gap off. So often that makes them bail on the pass. They realize getting around is not so easy. But then he went to the side of the pinned leg that wasn't extended. So this is obviously a good thing to go for. I'm able to spin away from that. And now he's gone back to this side. And I believe I'll do the turtle shell spin in a moment. But again, just keeping this leg high, not reaching out. I don't reach it out towards Ari as he goes around. That's a big mistake. I'm keeping it high, gripping onto my own leg, not letting it get pinned out to the side. Anything where it dangles out to the side will be bad. Okay, so keeping it in that kind of vertical plane, not that horizontal plane. All right. And then as Ari goes around this way, okay, there's the turtle shell spin. So he comes around. Now my left leg comes across, and that's going to spin me through. Again, he comes around, change legs, spin it across, and that lets you recover. I might have one more look at this. On the side Ari's passing to, my leg is up. I bring my leg across, and that lets me spin around. That was a nice smooth one.
We're just going to now look at the late stage defense to the bullfighter pass when we've happened to still be turned in towards the guard passer. We're still facing the guard passer. So really important to also distinguish if your opponent is attacking the knee ride or if he's just looking for the side control. Looking at the knee ride position, there's obviously a point where maybe your opponent, oh, that's so much pressure. Maybe there's a point where your opponent is still upright. When he is still upright, this is obviously where you have more chance to escape the guard pass without conceding too much position. So when my opponent is upright with the knee ride, I like to try and throw my foot to the center of the stomach. Now you have to be careful. Obviously don't pass your foot too far across the center line because you're just going to end up giving a smash pass to the other side. Also make sure not to have your toes turned in, so you don't want your ankle inverted because you can get a steamer lock from here quite easily. Make sure that your toes pointed up, and so that you've got you've got a nice step on your opponent's torso. So the very first thing I look to do from here is I frame the outside of my knee, I frame the shoulder. I also make sure when I frame the shoulder that I don't outstretch my arm. I still want to keep my elbow relatively tucked in, obviously, because if I frame from here, I don't really have the best leg positioning and I can get armbarred. So I always make sure that I close my elbow in, and I'm getting ready to turn in really hard to this side. If I start to let if I let myself get turned up in this direction, it's a lot easier for the armbar to happen. So as I'm framing, I'm trying to first push with this foot so that I can recover my bottom leg. If I'm having trouble recovering my bottom leg, it's most likely because my opponent is bringing his weight forwards. In this case here, I would try and enter the 50-50 position. First thing I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and wedge my knee between his heel and his butt. And now from here, I'm going to try to invert. If I'm having a lot of trouble getting to the 50-50 from here, when I start to bump up, this is where I can start to invert through to go to my 50-50 position. Okay, so now blocking turns all the way through, we end up in a 50-50 guard. So when my opponent does start to close the space, if I happen to be starting to turn away, this is a good time for me to try and use the gongo roll. I can frame the near shoulder, and I can now start to take my head all the way to my left foot, the far foot in this case.
So when we've lost any chance of framing and pushing our opponent away, you do have the option to turn for the gongoa or potentially turn into the legs, which might depend on which way you're being directed. If we're going to turn in, it can be with the knee up on the belly here, or it can be with the knee on the ground. We're going to first try to block the crossface by putting our head on top of our arm. We call this the pillow defense. Okay. So with my head on the arm, you see Ari can't collect my head. Right. Then you just I need to catch around the knee line so that he can't drive across my body, and I move my hips away. This is when it's okay to hip escape. Okay, I can put my feet on the ground here, move my hips away, and start sprawling out to north-south to either build my base backwards to get up or to try to drive through for an attack if you've actually got good purchase on the leg. Okay, so again, for this last stage one, if we can turn in, block the knee, move out, and then hook your hand through around the shin. This will just stop if Ari wants to run around. This run to north-south. This hook on the shin will keep a good grip here as it starts to come up and work to attach to the leg. To summarize how we recover from when we're facing our opponent as they get around the legs. First, if we can do any of the pummeling strategies we talked about first, we should do that. In the scenarios where we can't, so Ari's blocked, especially the bottom leg from coming back through, I might, if he's trying to pass into this space, not run around towards north-south, I'm going to put my bottom foot on the ground, block the top arm, roll through, and invert to recover. If Ari instead is trying to keep outrunning my legs as I extend my leg, then we use the turtle shell spin to recover. If Ari does manage to get inside that space, if we can pummel, we can push. bring our knee underneath and start to work into positions like 50-50 or to recover. If that's too late and I can't get any sort of pummeling, I either start to turn away using the gongoa, or I turn in, escaping away to 180 degrees and build my base up from there.
This next section, we're talking about when our hips are now turned away from our opponent. So in the previous, we've already covered now pummeling our feet, how to keep our feet in front of our opponent. And we want to do that as the first stage when someone does try to turn our hips away. But we're also going to cover what do you do when you can't pummel your legs, which we'll get into. Now, what guard passes does this include? Things like the leg drag, the throw by, some of the Toriendo or bullfighter variants where they will start to turn your hips away too. The other time you might turn away from your opponent is if you are facing them, but they've gotten too close that you can't actually implement any frames. You might actually want to turn away to kind of reset and use one of these actions to recover.
Now I want to just talk about what we can be doing to reface our hips to our opponent. So if Ari starts to turn me away, I can move my hips out and now face them towards him. It's going to like move away and face towards him, and that's one way of recovering. The gongoa actions, which we're going to talk about, will kind of swing us over to recover. But something in the gongoa is important as well, which is sometimes I can keep, like Ari can face me this way and I'm not facing him, and then I can bring my hips to the other side and I will be facing him. So if we look at this again, sometimes Ari will turn me and I find a way to move my hips away and I'm still on the same side, but now Ari's in front of me and this is much better position. So there's kind of different ways we can work to face our hips towards our opponent. A really important thing when someone's turning our hips away, it's something we covered in the general concepts section of this guard retention series, and that is don't let your hips turn relative to your body. I don't want my chest facing one way and my legs facing the other. So as we do get turned, we're looking to follow with our upper body and use that to allow ourselves to recover. Also, don't let your knee get pulled away from your chest this way too. If someone is pulling that knee away, we're going to be wanting to sit up and do similar actions to what we're showing here. Before we get into the order of techniques, some of these that I'm about to talk about we have covered already. But there should be like kind of an order of these 5 in terms of how bad things are getting. So the first is Ari starts to turn my hips and I can cross over. That's the first phase. The second phase, I'm going to have to use the high pummel. I can't bring this leg across, but I can pummel high to face my hips towards Ari and pummel my legs in front. The third is he's turning away. I can't do the high pummel, but I can do that under pummel. And then we get into the gongoas. And there's something we're going to call the ultimate gongoa, and we've got the gongoa as well. Okay, so the ultimate gongoa is a gongoa where I don't put my foot on the mat to retain my guard. And then there's where I have to turn further and put my foot on the mat, which is the regular gongoa.
Another option when your opponent does try to turn you away is to bring your leg high. Instead of having your feet down here, bring your leg high so that when they try to throw your leg, it then turns your hips towards them and squares you back up, and therefore they can't really get around the legs. As opposed to having your leg low down here, where when they go to push you, it turns your head towards. So if you want to see more about that, then check the facing in section.
So when we're in a situation where our hips are turned away and we're using a gongoa movement to recover our guard, we have this conflicting situation where we have to either think about framing and potentially risking an armbar, or not framing and potentially conceding the back. So the armbar shouldn't actually be a common thing that happens. The armbar usually arises from 1, poor frame placement, and 2, poor timing and basically doing the gongoa movement quite poorly. Similar to the bullfighter principles when we're bullfighter defense principles, when we frame, we always want to frame the closest part of the body. So this is very dependent on the posture of my opponent. So if he has his legs leading, I would rather frame his legs as a gongoa. If he has his shoulder leading, I would rather frame the shoulder. So a lot of the times what happens is people that do get armbarred, they've tried to recover very late. Their legs have kind of cleared have been cleared initially, and they frame a bit too high. This is where people usually jump in the arm.
So we're going to go through the ultimate gongoa now, which should be a new movement for you to learn. Let's just talk about the context for this. So just quickly, again, we got to the point where I feel like I'm not going to be able to get my legs to pummel here. I'm going to have to turn away to get something going. Okay. Now, preemptively framing whatever's available. So right now, I feel like the kind of mid tricep is a good area. With the ultimate gongoa, it's better because we don't have to turn as much and put our feet on the mat. So I'm going to tuck my elbow. Okay, I don't want my elbow wide now. This stops me turning. I actually want to use the momentum of me turning to help me roll away. So I'm going, as Ari puts pressure, I tuck my elbow, get on the side, and I use that elbow on the pressure to move my hips to the outside of Ari. So if you look at this, again, my hips are in front of, like Ari's kind of facing my hips right now, and I'm facing away from him. As I bring my elbow in and open my elbow on the ground, it pulls my hips past. Okay. And you need momentum for this. It works when you first practice this. If you do it slow, it'll probably be worse because it's kind of hard to use the momentum like that. But if Ari actually goes to pass fast, we can use this action quite well. And so what happens is the force drives through as Ari drives in, the force kind of helps me roll on my shoulder, elbow to the mat, and I can lift my hips and pull around. Be careful not to lift your hips too high. My aim is not to lift up in the air. I'm not trying to go like this. I'm really trying to swing my hips as far out to the side as possible. Okay, get my feet facing Ari again, and I'm ready to recover. So common mistakes with the ultimate gongoa. First is not framing. You actually, if you try to do this without, like if you just throw my legs and he's not bringing his shoulder in, it's actually kind of a hard movement to do by yourself. You can do it, but it's not actually as good as when you push off. That actually gives you the momentum. Your frame helps to load you up and push you out. Next common mistake is actually to try to fight the turn. If Ari's turning me, I'm actually not trying to bring my feet back against that arm. I will not be able to like push my leg back. It's not about doing that and trying to like swing and pendulum around this is actually very difficult. I really want to just bring my hips out. I use that, I let him take my leg, but I move my hips around that and I still get my feet back in front. And the last one is just the head position. So, a lot of the time people go to do these sort of things, but their head's not following their feet. Here I'm still in like a straight plane. I really need to kind of ball up and bring my head in. So we go here, head comes in, and my hips can follow, and I recover. So the ultimate gongoa is a movement where we use the opening a closed elbow to generate movement of our hips. So you'll see here, as that elbow closes, I can open that elbow, and that moves my hips. The ultimate gongoa is also a great way to counter if someone goes to knee on belly when you get turned a little bit. So, or if you're like, so Ari steps to here and I realize I'm not going to be able to pummel my feet. Instead of doing a big gongoa here, we can push off the leg. Now again, I'm going to need to do this with the momentum of it. As Ari comes in, I swing my hips back in front, have my feet facing me. Yeah, once more.
Now, we don't have a lot of footage of us doing the ultimate gongoa or the gongoa live just because it's a very specific pass, and you have to be quite late. Like your opponent has to actually turn your hips away, and we want to be fighting to not let our hips get turned away with our crossovers and our frames and everything that's going on. But here's one example of what is some form of ultimate gongoa. Okay, so you'll see Ari will start to turn my hips towards my right, and I'm going to frame, and you'll see I'll drop my elbow in, and my hips will move towards my left onto this side. Okay, so I frame, I try to bring this leg in front, but it's not really going to connect to anything. My elbow is going to go onto the ground, and my hips will move out to this way. Okay, so it's like the ultimate gongoa action that brought my hips out, and that's put Ari in front of my legs. So now I've got a chance to use my frames here or a turtle shell spin to recover.
This is the very basic gongoa roll. It's not as effective as the ultimate gongoa roll, but still really important to learn so that you can actually perfect the ultimate gongoa roll. So as my hips are getting redirected away, this basic variation, we're just going to look at posting our bottom foot on the floor. We're making sure that our knee is pointed down towards the mat and our heels up towards the ceiling, so that it's easier for us to invert as opposed to converting with a knee pointing to the ceiling. All I'm looking to do is taking my upper body towards my lower body, so I'm trying to take my head towards my toe. I'm starting to come up to my knees. I'm effectively in like a turtle position here. Now I'm looking to take my head towards my toes as I square back up with my opponent. One time. One of the common mistakes with the gongoa roll is the guard player will lift his hips too high. The reason why this is bad, not so much for performing the movement, it's more so once you actually start to square it with your opponent, you will land with your hips too high, and you basically get caught in quite a bad spot for an under the legs pass. So while it is important for us to lift our hips off the floor when we do the gongoa roll, we actually want to make sure that we don't lift our hips too high off the floor. Also, another thing to be aware of, you always want to be ready to pummel your feet to the inside, especially behind the shoulder blades after you've completed your gongoa roll, because most likely your opponent will be looking to attack an under the legs pass. One of the common mistakes you'll see with the gongoa roll is upon finishing the roll, a lot of people will still have the guard passer on the outside of their legs, like so. Really important that when we finish our roll, that our hips are on the outside of the guard passer's feet. So that when we finish our roll, we're actually square with our opponent and not at threat of an around the legs pass. One thing to take note of as well, if you don't have the best hamstring flexibility, you're going to be much better off doing this motion with a bent knee. The reason why, as I get my legs thrown, if I have my knees straight, as I go to bring my head towards my toe, if I'm lacking that hamstring flexibility, I'm not actually going to bring my head towards my toe. If I bend my knee though, I take a lot of stress off the hamstring, and it makes it a lot easier for me to bring my head towards my feet. Like so. Another common mistake some people will do is instead of rolling all the way through, taking their head towards their foot, they basically do like a hip escape, and their hip stays on the floor. So they get thrown, and they try to push off the floor, but they keep their hips on the floor, and they can't complete the full inversion. So always make sure your hips come off the floor. Really important for the person on top when they're doing this throw by motion. For the person on bottom to successfully train this position, you have to run towards the head, but behind the guard passer. If you start to run towards the other direction, I can't actually do the gongoa movement. I have to do the bottom foot inversion to square back up. Quick summary of the gongoa roll. framing the same side that our opponent is passing to. Stretching out the bottom leg, toes pointed down towards the mat, heel to the ceiling, knee also pointed down to the mat. Taking our head towards the bottom toes, lifting the hips up, and then bringing the hips back to the floor with the feet on the bicep.
So summary for when someone's turning our hips away. If we can, we pummel our feet back in front. If we're late to that, we can use the high pummel, get our feet back in front. If the high pummel is not working, we can use the under pummel to try to recover. And then if all of our leg pummeling is gone, we start using our gongo variants. Ideally, we use the ultimate gongo, not putting our foot on the mat. But if we have to, we do put our foot on the mat. We can recover with the regular gongo. If our opponent covers the distance while we're facing in and starts to close the gap, there are times when we will start to turn away and use these gongo style actions to recover.